Welcome to What's Your Next Move, the podcast for peak performers who are making things happen but are running into roadblocks that prevent them from getting what they want. Whether you work for someone else, you're an entrepreneur, thinking about starting your own business, or at a point in your life where you just can't make the move from where you are to where you want to go, you're in the right place. This podcast is all about answering one question: what's your next move? And helping you harness your power so your next move is the one that changes your life. I'm your host and resident provocateur, Arlene Battisil, and I want to know, what's your next move? Hi there, I'm Arlene Battisil, your host and resident provocateur and the business dominatrix, and I am thrilled to have a really wonderful guest today on our show, Bruce Langford. I had the pleasure and privilege and honor of being on his podcast recently, Mindfulness Mode podcast. And it was such a delightful conversation, and he's a magnificent interviewer. And I can see why he is so successful as the consultant that he is. He spends a lot of time working with corporations in doing mindfulness training for employees. And you might think when you hear the word mindfulness that it's one of those woo-woo kind of words, because it just, mindfulness, you have to be mindful of this and you have to be mindful of that. But when you really get into understanding what that means, there's so much behind it that it really is worthwhile to explore this for yourself in terms of how you go through your life, how you go through a day, how you see things, how you view things, what you do with that information, and for the purpose of this podcast, help you arrive at what's your next move. And so I am really delighted to have Bruce with me today. I think we're going to have a magnificent conversation, one I've been really looking forward to. And so, Bruce, thank you so much for being with me today.
And thank you, Arlene. I'm so excited to talk with you. It was so much fun talking on the other show when you came on Mindfulness Mode. But yes, I'm really excited to talk with you because you're just so much fun and so straightforward and upfront. That's what I love.
And the same is true for you. I think we've got a mutual admiration society going on here because, what happens is, when you find like-minded people and you connect with them and they have a rhythm that's very similar to your own, it's so easy to be with them. And I don't know, I just find it really wonderful to have those kinds of interactions. And, in life, we have interactions with all kinds of people. And that in the workplace, we can have conflicts with people because they rub us the wrong way, or we somehow just don't like them, or, the power dynamic that exists in the workplace between bosses and employees. And there just is always this tension in interactions between people, and even in our interpersonal relationships, either with friends, families, our spouses, our significant others, our children. And the world is filled with so much tension that when you connect with somebody who has a really similar rhythm as your own, oh my gosh, it's such a gift. So, Bruce, I will tell you, you are a real gift to me. So thank you for being my gift.
You're making me laugh. This is so much fun. Yeah, when you talk about tension, for sure, there's a lot of tension out there in the world. And we want to do something about that, don't we, Arlene?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And what's really interesting is, we're doing really similar things around, dealing with people and how they interact with one another and how they can make those changes simply by paying attention to what is actually happening and what is going on for one another. But before we get into that, Bruce, if you can share with our listeners, talk to us about what you're doing right now in your work and also where you're at in your life right now.
Well, what I'm doing right now is I'm teaching mindfulness. I'm sharing how you can have a more improved work-life balance. And like you mentioned at the beginning, I'm moving more and more into helping corporations do that, helping businesses do that, because there is so much pain out there these days. Corporations are putting thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars into recruiting people, and then they get them in there, and then all of a sudden, sudden there's this, attrition rate. There are people dropping out. There's, people getting in there and they're uncomfortable with each other, and there's conflict, just like you described. And, you can actually do something about that in your business or corporation. You can bring more mindfulness on board so that employees start to understand what it really means to be content in life, and how you can have that level of, happiness, that level of, hey, I'm really doing what I enjoy and life is good. And you can get that through mindfulness.
Beautiful. And talk to me a bit about just what's happening for you in your life right now.
Yeah, so I'm doing that kind of work. I'm teaching meditation to people. I'm, teaching different, like if people are experiencing levels of anxiety, then I'll work with you one-on-one to help you with that. And people connect with me through my podcast because I do have a lot of listeners on that. And I also do speaking engagements as well, and get out there and speak at events or do keynotes or do training workshops. And of course, I worked in bullying prevention for over 10 years, and I still get calls to work in that field. And I find it's interesting because mindfulness can totally decrease bullying levels. And that's how I ended up getting into mindfulness, because I found, you can teach about concepts to reduce bullying. You can teach what it is, and you can help people understand more about it. But ultimately, if you teach about mindfulness and what that means, then bullying will just start to decrease. So that's very powerful for me, the work I do teaching that.
Right, absolutely. And so, before I ask you the second question of my podcast, which I ask everybody, can you walk us through exactly what you mean by mindfulness?
Absolutely. Yeah, mindfulness to me, and it means different things to different people, that's for sure. But mindfulness to me is living in the moment, understanding that now, this very moment in time, is what's most important. That's the only thing we really have. And try not to focus on the past so much. Try not to focus on the future so much, because that's what really messes us up. We get worrying about what might happen, and we can spend our whole lives worrying about what might happen, and it never does,
Right.
And if you can focus on the moment, that can make your life so much better. And the second thing is not judging. Mindfulness is about not judging other people, not judging other situations. And when I say not judging, I mean not judging so much, because as human beings, that's something we just do. But we can consciously decide not to do it so much. We can decide, hey, why should I judge that person based on something that isn't even solid evidence? Don't do that. And the thing is, if you can learn not to judge others, not to judge situations, Arlene, then you will not judge yourself so much. And that is what's pulling us back.
Right.
Those of us who are stuck or frustrated with life, it's because we're judging ourselves a lot of times.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that the judgment of other people always stems from the judgment that we place on ourselves. And I find that people are so punitive to themselves, and it's, I'm not good enough. I'm doubting myself. I have to be a perfectionist. They've got this, really noisy inner critic going on in their head, and it spills out over onto everybody else in their life, where because they can't manage, and tell me your thoughts on this, Bruce, because they can't manage the extent to which they have difficulty with themselves and the ways that they punish themselves, it actually gets turned outward. What are your thoughts on that?
It definitely does. And it can be a snowball effect. The more you're thinking about, yourself and thinking about what, you're beating yourself up basically through your own self-talk. And the more you do that, the worse it gets. And you just end up punishing yourself and causing all kinds of roadblocks. And you think in your conscious mind that you want to achieve something, and then in your unconscious mind it's working against you. And
Right.
it's sabotaging you, and you're sitting there trying to figure out, why is this happening? And it can be very, very frustrating for people.
Right. Absolutely. And when you were just talking a few minutes ago about how you just cannot, be thinking about certain things, in a way, what you were describing was how we have a tendency to brood and ruminate over things. And you talk about you just can't do that, but how does a person stop that process of thinking about something over and over and over again, and they can't really break free from what actually becomes like an obsessive behavior? Because a lot of that obsessive behavior, and I'm not talking clinically obsessed, like somebody who has obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. I'm just talking about what happens where, we get our panties in a knot and we're just, all bent out of shape about something and we can't let it go. And a lot of this actually is happening in the wiring of the brain. And so how do you actually break free of that?
There's a number of ways. And it's funny talking to you about this, because I think if this were happening to you, Arlene, you'd just say, screw it. Stop it. and probably something that starts with F.
I was like, fuck off
this. I'm not putting up with this. This is it. I've had it. And that's exactly what you have to do. You can't just sit there and go, oh, I'm hearing these negative voices and I don't know what to, and I'm not making fun of people who are experiencing this. Don't get me wrong, but you have to speak up, or you have to jump up, or you have to take action somehow. And maybe for you, it is jumping up and down and pounding the wall and saying, I'm not putting up with this anymore, because that's what you have to do. When you're hearing those voices, you have to do something about it. And unfortunately, there's this inner mechanism that kind of works against us sometimes. And it's saying, oh, just put up with this misery. This is how you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be miserable, and you're not supposed to be miserable. So jump up, do something about it, speak up, and don't let it go on. And maybe that means get out there and jump on your trampoline, or it means take a swim, or it means, just do something.
Right. And what's interesting, what you're saying about do something, is there actually is something to when you get yourself caught up in these thought patterns, that I think one of the only ways that you can actually break that pattern when it is happening is to go and do something physical. And, there's no joke around people going off to the gym, because what you're effectively doing is you are requiring your brain to focus on something else. And what you have to do is actually short circuit what is happening in your head in those moments where you're obsessing about something and ruminating. You actually have to focus on something else. And, I'm curious what you do, Bruce, because I start every morning rowing at the crack of dawn and sometimes before, and I'll spend an hour rowing in the marina where I live. And it's unbelievable that that simple act of having to focus so intently on what I'm doing sets up my whole day, where I am not likely going to get bent out of shape about anything, or get into this pattern of having these, ruminating thoughts. And it is all about being physical. And, I hate the idea of going off to the gym. So it would be, I would go out and walk for an hour, or I'll go and row. And for you, what do you find in your own life that, kind of keeps these thoughts at bay in terms of what you do physically?
Well, what I do is I have a total gym at my house, and I just love this thing. You just get on that, and there's so many different things you can do. And I get my arms moving, and I'm pulling myself up, and I'm doing all these different, parts of my routine. And it just makes me feel so good. And of course, there are studies out there that say, yeah, get your arms moving, get your legs moving, and it helps your brain health as well, especially when you're moving your left arm across into the right space and you're moving your right arm across into your left. It's great for your left-right brain connection. And so I really like to do this. I have a path close by my office, which goes by the river. So I get down there and I get on that path and I just get, down there either cycling or walking or jogging down there by the water. And that helps me so much too. That's just a great way of getting energy and getting exercise. So those are a couple of things I do.
Beautiful. I never realized how important the physical piece was, but it actually does something to the brain. And this is only becoming apparent to people probably in the last few years that people have been talking about this connection of, what's going on in our head is entirely a function of what's going on in our brain and the neural pathways and so forth. Now, let's talk for a minute before we get into my second question of the podcast.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the relationships between people in the workplace and where mindfulness comes in, because one of the biggest challenges in the workplace is the power dynamic between supervisors and employees, managers and employees, executives and employees. And there are always issues between those people that stem from that power dynamic. Talk to me about the relationship between those people, the power dynamic, and where mindfulness fits in and who needs it most in that environment.
You're absolutely right. The power dynamic can be just crazy. And there can be so much toxicity, in a workplace. And, and it builds. And it builds and it builds unless something is done about it. And of course, most of this goes back to ego. It really does. And so we have to learn to kind of let that ego just subside itself a little bit. Don't be so focused on what the ego is telling us to do. And that's easier said than done because you're very powerful. But if executives and project leaders and CEOs can come to realize that, hey, that ego is playing too big a role here. And this is what is causing the problem with the relationships. This is what is causing this power problem here. Then they can actually reset it and change things so that people can be a lot happier and that those relationships can go much smoother. And so one of the things that I always suggest is related to meditation. Now, whatever form it can take for you, and I know for you it's rowing, Arlene, that meditation that, for you rowing, you get out there and it's a form of meditation. Well, if you're a CEO or a project leader, figure out what resonates with you and get that meditation element into your life. And so many people just keep thinking, well, it sounds good and I'd like to do it and I think it's a good idea, but they never actually do it. They don't actually take it seriously. Or a lot of people I talk to, a lot of my clients have said, yeah, well, I tried it for a week or so and it wasn't making any difference. And, and I really found my mind was too busy, so I couldn't really do it. It's very common. And the fact is, in my opinion, everybody can do it.
Right.
It's whether you think you can do it. If you think you can't do it, you can't.
Right.
But truly, everybody can do it. And that's what I do is I take people through the steps to help them learn how they can do this. And they can quiet their brain. And through that, they're going to start to notice that their relationships are improving and their teams that they're working with are starting to gel better. And there's way less of this toxic environment happening.
And what is it that's happening within the person that when you teach them mindfulness techniques, whether it's meditation or physical activity or whatever it is that you're going to teach them based on what their situation is, what is it that happens for them in being mindful that actually translates into them having better relationships with people?
Well, you mentioned it about the neural pathways. Meditation scientists have proven that only after a couple of weeks, 2 weeks of meditation, the neural pathways in your brain start to actually change. So you can only imagine after 6 weeks or 8 weeks how much they change. And what does happen, Arlene, is there's a new sense of calm. And,
Mm-hmm.
employees will pick that up. Other people that you're working near, they'll pick up that, hey, you seem a little more relaxed or a little more calm. They might not say anything, but they're
Like,
going to notice.
What do you mean I'm calm? I'm not calm. Get away from me.
Exactly.
I am not a calm person.
That's so funny. But that change that takes place within the brain actually can be perceived by other people quite clearly, and then they start to feel more comfortable, and relationships start to blossom and things start to improve, and it's really quite incredible. And I get feedback from people all the time who've said, you taught me how to meditate, and you told me that if I stuck with it, some of these things will happen, and now it's happening. It's panning out. And I just want to say thank you. So it does make a difference. And it starts with the brain, the neural pathways in your brain, as you've said, they start to change, and you become a more calm person, a person who is more concerned about making things work and making things move smoothly, and be less critical. You become a less critical person, and that criticism is what causes a lot of problem.
Right, for sure. And, in all of your experience and just in your own thoughts about this, if you were to trace back for people the origins of what produces this tense state for most people that now require them to take some action to quiet themselves, where does the disquiet come from for most people, in your opinion?
I think it comes from that inner voice saying you're not good enough. You haven't achieved enough. You haven't done enough. You haven't lived up to what somebody in your life believes you should, whether it's a parent or whatever. I mean, we're all wired differently. We all experience different things when we were growing up. And there are certain moments in time that are still replaying themselves over and over and over in your brain. And there's a way to stop that.
Right.
But a lot of us don't know how to do that. A lot of my clients are so grateful when they do learn how to do that, and they can't believe how they can just switch it off once they learn.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm curious, when you just said about switching it off, I know that I've heard of visualization techniques where, you think about the stove and turning the burner down, and you actually picture that. Or it's the sound system is on full blast, and then you just actually see yourself moving your hand to the dial and turning it down so that you can experience the act of getting control over that noise and simply turning it down. Do you feel that visualization techniques are really effective in people becoming more mindful?
Absolutely. And you're such a pro. Your description of how you do that, I know that you work with so many clients. Your description is right on, because absolutely, I believe you can do that. And so do my clients. After I've worked with them for a while, they're like, wow, I can't believe what a difference this has made. And, after spending some time with clients, you learn what those voices are saying,
Right.
what they're hearing repeated over and over and over. And then it becomes easier. Well, I don't know. Sometimes I even notice, I'm saying certain things to my clients and I'm thinking, where did that come from? It's just sort of coming out based on all the things I learned about the client. And then, yes, I offer some visualization ideas, think about this and envision your dad doing this or doing that, and think back to, when you were a child. And there are so many visualization techniques that are incredibly powerful. So yes, I do use those and believe in them very much.
Beautiful. I want to ask you, well, two things. One is, when people are taking action to become more mindful in whatever it is that they're doing, whatever technique they're using, what often happens is that people get started doing these things and they start having a little bit of success with it and they're all enthusiastic about it. And then it just kind of goes by the wayside. And then obviously they are having the same problems again. What do you think is going on for people that they cannot sustain this?
I think it's human nature. A lot of times, I think it's the way we're wired. But, I'm sitting here with this book, The Power of Habit. And that was an incredibly awesome book. I found it very worthwhile reading that book, The Power of Habit, because it explains that. It explains how we can create habits in our lives that stick, that stay with us, and that make a positive difference. Or, of course, unfortunately, we can create habits, sometimes inadvertently, which do the opposite. Well, habits which cause problems. They wreak havoc in our life. And sometimes they stick and we can't get rid of them. And it's just very difficult. But this book goes on into great detail, but it's a very easy read too, because Charles Duhigg tells stories about people that have experienced some of these issues with habit, and he tells some great stories about people that have introduced new habits into their lives to totally change their lives and spin them in a new direction. So
Right.
we can definitely take control of our habits and change what is making a difference in our life. And it just takes a few weeks for those habits to truly take hold.
Beautiful. And how does this work for people who are really, truly suffering with anxiety?
I think you start with one thing. You start with one thing and you move from there, because anxiety can be so overwhelming and it can feel like, there's nothing I can do about this.
Right.
Totally has its control over me. But start with one thing. And maybe that means, the visualization of every time you walk through a doorway, think, am I being mindful right now? And that can be powerful. That can be one thing that you're doing, and it can make a difference.
Right. Right.
So
For
that's what
sure.
I would say. Just start with one thing and then go from there, and start realizing you can make a difference in your life. And many of those differences are from taking action and moving, getting up,
Right.
like we talked about already, just getting your body moving. And that's one of the things Tony Robbins talks about all the time, get up and get moving and do jumping jacks, do something and get your body going, because that helps you to move out of these states.
Right, for sure. And what's really interesting about your reference to Tony Robbins is that I just saw something yesterday where somebody had apparently been counting his behaviors at one of his events. And they wrote that in an average event that he does, which could be, 3, 4, 5 hours long, whatever, it would be a one-day event, he will jump 1,000 times.
Wow.
I mean,
I believe it.
it's so stunning. And yet that is actually what he does. And he uses that technique with the people who attend his events. And he's got people standing up and jumping up and down and, high-fiving each other. He gets people moving, which completely changes how they feel. And so I think this is one of the most important things to mindfulness, which is to just be moving, which is what we've touched on a number of times in our conversation so far. It's really stunning.
It is.
It's so simple. I mean, it's so simple. It's like, what are you people doing? What are you thinking? Why are you sitting on your ass? Just go move. You'll feel better. You don't
it's absolutely
take a
true.
pill. What the fuck?
Yeah, and that's the thing, with taking a pill, you go to your doctor and the doctor says, here's the prescription, go fill that and start. And it's not to blame the doctors, but that's the world we live in.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
So absolutely, it sounds so simple to get up and take a walk or take a run or have a swim, or whatever it is. It sounds too simple, but it actually changes how your brain works.
Yep. Absolutely. It completely changes your physiology. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
Now, Bruce, you're in the business of mindfulness, and I don't know if this is a leap here, but I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that maybe there was a point in time in your own life when mindfulness was not a daily practice for you.
You are absolutely right, Arlene. Yeah. There was a point in my life I had no idea what that even meant.
So, Bruce, will you walk me back in time to a moment, or it could be more moments, many moments, a situation, something that happened either by your choice or not, something that was imposed on you or thrust on you, something that happened that changed the entire trajectory of your life, such that you landed where you are today in the business of mindfulness?
Yeah, there are a number of those moments, Arlene. And one of them was I was teaching music and I enjoyed that. But one of the things that happened was that I saw a student who was looking very unhappy. And I thought, what is this? Like, all the other kids were playing basketball and having fun, and this one student, he's just kind of hanging out over by the wall. And I thought, well, this picture just doesn't look right. And I asked the other kids, and then I asked him, and they said, well, it's his accent. And I said, what do you mean accent? And then it turns out he had a very minor, what I considered a very minor speech impediment, but it turned out that he was being bullied. And I still remember that moment of standing there and seeing that boy by the wall and just hanging over there by himself. And I thought, this isn't right. And so I spent some time talking with him, and I said, maybe I can help you. I said, I can obviously help you if I'm right there in the same room as you, and I can make sure that nobody's bullying you or picking on you, but I want to help you in a bigger way. And I said, what if through your help, I could help hundreds of other people? I said, what if you could be in a video and you could be talking about what you feel and what you're experiencing, and then we could share that with others and they could be inspired to, change their lives through you. And he said, oh, I don't know. I don't think I could do that. And it was only 4 or 5 days later, he came and he knocked on my door, and that boy said, Mr. Langford, he said, I've been thinking so much about this. And he said, I've been thinking that even if I could only help one person, it would be worth it. And I would really like to make that video that you talked about. So I hired a videographer, and this boy came as the subject, and he was into martial arts and he was extremely good at it. And I wanted to show that confidence and that sense of empowerment that he had when he was doing the martial arts. And then I thought that will be impactful to start the video that way, and then have him start talking about how he's bullied and how he feels about it and what he does to deal with it, and he does take action too. He gets up and he moves his body. And so that video has now been seen by over 100,000 middle school students, because I've shown so many while I did my presentations. But just that moment in time is etched in my memory when I saw him standing there alone, and I knew that he had so much to offer. And I thought, what's going on here? This picture isn't right. And that definitely changed the trajectory of my life, because then I ended up leaving that teaching job and becoming a full-time anti-bullying expert, and, moving all around the country and doing presentations. And then that took me into mindfulness after that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, I find something really interesting about the story you just told me, and I would like to explore this with you if you would indulge me.
Sure.
Okay, you described a situation that most people wouldn't notice, and I'm curious about what it is about you that had you noticing this about this kid.
Oh, well, that's easy.
Go ahead.
I think that's easy, because when I was a kid, when I was his age, I felt very alone. I felt very cut off from the rest of the world. And I don't know why I was experiencing so much anxiety, but I had this high voice. My voice hadn't changed properly the way the voices of the other boys did. And I sort of had this high little squeaky voice. And I was like, and I didn't know why. I had no idea why. I had no idea what to do about it. All I knew was that people thought I sounded very weird, and that my voice didn't match my body. My voice didn't match the way I looked. But I just lived my life isolated, afraid to say anything. I felt like if I said anything, people would make fun of me. And I was right. They did sometimes. And so I just went into myself. And as I went through high school, even more so. And my voice didn't change. And I had this terrible feeling of insecurity. And if I ever had to do something in front of the class or do a presentation or something, I just was horrified. And it was a miserable, painful life that I was experiencing. And I reached out. I tried to ask people, the guidance counselor at school and different people. So, what's the matter with my voice? Why I feel really bad because I don't think my voice is right. And they just didn't know what to say, basically. They just like, well, I guess that's just the way your voice is. And finally, I asked the right person. By this time, it was the first year of college. And I asked the right person, who was I guess it was the doctor in the health office of the college. And I went there and talked to this person, and he said, well, I don't think there's anything wrong, but I'm going to refer you to the ear, throat, and nose specialist. And so he did. And I walked in and met this woman who was the specialist. And I said about 3 words, and she said, oh, I know what's the matter with you. And I said, you do? And she says, yeah, you have this condition. She said, I've worked with other people with this. You're speaking in a falsetto voice, and I can help you. I'll offer you therapy. You can come here a few times, and you're going to start speaking in your own natural voice. And I'm like, what? This is insane. It was like, oh my gosh. It was like the whole sky opened, the whole world opened up for me. And in only like a week or two, I was speaking in my own natural low voice. And I was like, wow, I can do anything. I could become a teacher. I could get out there. I could sing. I could get a job doing like the music that I love so much. And I did. And I went downtown, and I just went into different establishments and said, hey, I could play the piano for your piano bar or whatever. And that's what I did. I ended up becoming a piano bar guy, and I played and sang songs there. And I was a church organist and music director, choir director. And it was like, oh man, I can't get enough of this, just teaching and singing and doing what I loved. And it was like a whole new beginning. So I'm sure when I saw that boy that day standing there by the wall of that school, I saw myself.
Absolutely. That's what I thought was happening, because most people don't notice things like that. They're just completely oblivious to it. And I'm curious about what you just said about once you actually found your voice, because you were missing a voice. You were missing your voice, which actually deprived you of your voice. And for many people who are deprived of their voice, however that finds its way to them, be it someone shutting them down and telling them they're not good enough, and then they just feel like they can't speak anymore, or someone telling them they're stupid, or all the things that people do to other people that diminish them to the point where they can no longer speak. How is it that throughout a good portion of your young life, all the way into college, when you were struggling with not having your real voice and stuck with this other voice and paying the price for it, how is it that that experience for such a long period of time did not have a lasting effect on you at the point you actually literally found your voice? I mean, that's pretty extraordinary that you didn't just stay in a place where, you're just not going to speak. It doesn't matter anymore what your voice is going to become. The impact of not having your voice for that long period of time would normally crush a person. And that there you are just celebrating the fact that you found your voice, and you're just like running around like a crazy person saying, I have my voice, in your big, deep radio, fabulous, super successful podcasting voice that you have.
Well, I think it was, all I can say is I think it was like a kind of an inner strength. It was just a determination that I had, that I was just, no matter what, I was never going to give up hope. I was never going to quit. I was just going to move forward. And I would have dreams, very, very vivid dreams where, there had been this procedure done, and maybe they did this procedure on my throat or something, and then I could now speak with a clear, low voice like I was supposed to. I had all these incredible dreams and everything else. So I just simply didn't give up hope, even though it seemed hopeless.
Right. And, it's funny when you're describing, this image in your head, which of course is why visualization is obviously so important to you. Yeah. But it evoked this image for me of seeing you as this little kid just jumping up and down with boundless energy. And yet you have a piece of masking tape or duct tape across your mouth, and you're there just like yelling and singing and eyes bright and all of that. And yet, what's coming out is just not going to be okay. But if only you could take that tape off your mouth, which is obviously what happened when you worked with the doctor that helped you.
Yes.
When you finally found the person that knew what the problem was. And I'm curious about what you think about what it is about you that sets you apart from other people who are debilitated by the earlier experience, which means they cannot speak.
Well, I just think that I've been through this pain. I've had this pain. And I think unless you've had a pain like that, you can't truly know what it feels like. And I'm not saying that I truly know what every other person is going through, but I have had a level of that hurt, that pain, and that feeling that, I know it's there. I know there's a way I can move forward. I know I can reach through this, but I'm not sure how or when it's going to happen. And that's exactly what others are looking for in the world. There are so many people out there with pain and with anxiety and with stress and overwhelm. And I can help because I can kind of take them back to that place, and through mantras and visualization I can help them to, sometimes it's sudden, sometimes it's a sudden thing where they are able to just almost see the light and they just almost come alive, much like I did, but it's not going to take the same form that I had, but for them it will be different. And I think that's why I'm able to help so many other people.
Right. And so I would imagine the entire path that you found yourself on with respect to the anti-bullying work that you were doing, obviously it was motivated by this young person that you had encountered. And clearly, the origins of your feeling about this, motivated you to do this kind of work. But it seems like this is a kind of work that has become a calling for you, whereas, you decided to become a teacher. And we decide to become teachers because we want to help students learn. We like teaching. We like working with children or adults. And the moment they have that aha moment because of something we've taught them, and how gratifying that is for us. But, people can be teachers for their entire careers and not feel the passion that I sense in you when you took on the whole work of anti-bullying. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's true. And when I was teaching, I was always looking out for the underdog. Like I would have kids in my classroom. I would think, oh man, that person needs help. They just need somebody to kind of take them and help them and lead them. And I had this one boy, and I noticed that when I went to the staff room, there were a lot of things said, about this kid because he didn't cooperate very well, and he had a lot of anger and pain and everything else. But of course, he acted out because of this. And when he came to the music room, I quickly discovered, he wasn't very cooperative with me either at first, and he didn't want to play a band instrument. He didn't want to do this stuff. And I said, well, what about drums? And he kind of lit up just a little bit. And I could just see that. And so I said, well, come on in at noon hour and I'll show you how to play some basic drum stuff. So he did. And then he came in more and more, and I showed him how to do fills, and I showed him how to do, a basic rock rhythm. And I showed him how to do all these things. And so then he ended up being a drummer that everybody loved hearing him. Everybody loved it when he played the drums with the band. And then about 7 or 8 years later, I was downtown, and I was just walking near, I forget, some of the bigger buildings downtown in my city here, London, Ontario. And all of a sudden I met this guy, and he stopped and he said, Mr. Langford. And I'm like, Brad? And he says, yeah. He says, oh, wait till I tell you. And he was with a couple of other guys. He says, hey guys. And he says, this is Mr. Langford. This is the man that taught me how to play the drums. And he says to me, now I'm on a Canada-wide tour, and I'm playing with this band, and I'm a drummer with the band, and it's the best thing ever. And hey guys, this is Mr. Langford. And I'm like, whoa, like what an interesting experience, I tell you.
Yeah, for sure. And it's very rare that teachers have those moments where,
Yes,
students and adults will come back to them and say, this was the impact that you had on me. Yeah. And it's really hard to believe because you're just doing your job and everything.
That's
but
right.
I mean, people have no idea how much of an impact teachers have, or all of us have, just in terms of the interactions we have with them. And so with the little drummer boy, I'm curious, do you think that his responsiveness to you was about the drums, really? Or was it about the fact that you continued to express your interest and focus on him?
Well, I think he probably felt that vibe that I truly cared about him and about his life. And, no matter what he did, because he did do some stuff to get into trouble, and, he did, but no matter what he did, I tried not to judge him, and I was there for him, and I continued to teach him drums and help, give him opportunities to play the drums with the band selections and things like that. So I think he probably could pick that up for sure.
No doubt about it. And obviously the joy with which he was feeling, the moment that he saw you, and then here he is telling all of his friends, which obviously he was talking about Mr. Langford to these guys, and they're like, who the fuck is Mr. Langford? That's like just some old dude in, elementary school or some shit like that. It's like, no, this is really pivotal for this kid.
Yeah.
What this brings to mind for me, Bruce, is this idea of mindfulness as we understand it, and primarily as you consult with people about it and work with them, is very much an internal thing. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about mindfulness as an external thing in terms of our relationships with other people, because being mindful in the way we've talked about it has an impact on us. But when you think about it in the external, where we are being mindful of what we're doing with other people, it has a huge impact. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because I actually think, and I'm just saying this, I have no basis for saying this, but my instincts are that mindfulness is very different when it is internal versus external. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, I think you're right, Arlene. And yeah, mindfulness is definitely an internal thing, but when you start practicing mindfulness, it becomes external as well. It just becomes internal and external because of the actions you are carrying on in your life. You are actually doing physical things that you would not have done before you became more mindful. You are now behaving differently. You're reacting differently to situations. Right. And so that's very external, for people to observe you. And if you're a father or a mother or a teacher, well, we're all teachers, let's face it. We're all
for sure.
And people notice us. We are role models for people. We are examples. And if you are living with that level of mindfulness, then you're acting it out everywhere you go. And that's contagious because people see it and they start thinking, oh, look at that person. That person seems really calm, or that person seems very respectful or whatever. And that is contagious. And that's what we need in this world, is more people to realize that respect is part of mindfulness. And when we exhibit levels of respect, we are modeling it for other people. And we can change the world that way, little by little, bit by bit. Not that we're going out to necessarily change the world, but by changing yourself, you can make a difference and a positive impact with others for sure.
Right. No doubt about it. And do you think that at the root of mindfulness is just simply a matter of being compassionate toward ourselves?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think, being compassionate to ourselves helps us to be more compassionate to others. If we notice that some of our relationships aren't really doing that great, maybe you don't feel a real good connection with that person, then stop and think, oh, maybe the compassion I have for myself isn't at a healthy state right now either. And, you can make a difference in that. And we talked about meditation already a little bit, but just by maybe doing some journaling, that can make a big difference. Just take some time for yourself, sit down and start jotting down your thoughts. What do I want in this world? Who am I? Write down some thoughts about these questions, and the things that you write down may end up being quite profound to you.
Right. And for you, Bruce, when you look back on your life, can you think about a moment in time prior to when you saw this kid at school and discovered what was going on for him? Can you trace back to any earlier point in time in your life where you really came to understand what compassion means?
Oh,
or
definitely.
when you learned it?
Yes, I had this wonderful woman in my life. She was my grandmother's sister, so she was my great aunt, and she
Mhm.
was an incredible woman. And she was one of those people that always put others first. She
Mhm.
always, every time she would come visit, she would say, "Well, tell me about you." This was one of her lines that I specifically remember, and I remember her coming to our house one time, and we lived on the farm. We had this farmhouse, and we had this old upright piano, and she would come in and she would sit down and she would say, "Well, now tell me about you." And then I'd be, as a little kid, like I'm talking, I was like 6 or 7 years old, and I think,
Mhm.
well, this is unbelievable that this person cares about me. Adults usually don't do that with kids.
Right.
So she'd talk to me a little bit, and then she would go and she would sit down at the old upright piano, and I was mesmerized. I was amazed because she just had both arms just going full blast, like she, I don't know if she had really been trained as a piano player as much as she just kind of played by ear, and she just made it all happen. And she had these vibes. I think she could just listen to a song, and then she just sat down to the piano and it happened. She could play almost anything. And I had this incredible level of awe for this woman and
Mm.
how she could create this music. And I remember specifically when she came to visit that time, I remember specifically thinking, I want to do that. I
Mm.
want to be able to do that. And that definitely made all the difference in my life, because I started asking my parents after she left, "Well, can I take piano lessons? I want
Mhm.
to learn to play the piano." And it was quite a long time that, I didn't get a response, or I didn't get the response I wanted.
Mhm.
And finally, well, you see, part of the problem was my older brother was taking piano lessons at the time, and my mother was having a hard time getting him to practice. He didn't want to practice. And so to her, that was just a real pain in the ass. Taking this kid to
Yeah.
piano lessons that he won't practice.
And
What am
here,
I going to?
yeah, and here she's got another one wanting to do the same thing, which totals nothing.
And she had 5 boys, and I'm sure she was just a little overwhelmed at times. And so then finally she said to me, "Well," she said, "okay, but here's the deal. You have to pay for your own lessons and pay for your own book or whatever. If you need music books or whatever, you pay. It comes out of your allowance.
Mhm.
And so it's up to you. I don't want to have to tell you to practice."
Right.
And so she kind of made this deal with me ahead of time. And so I knew that was where she had set the bar. So I, used my own money to pay for the lessons,
Mhm.
and I went there, and had this little old lady was my teacher from down the road. And I thought, well, this is cool. I can play Lightly Row or whatever these songs are. I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I learned to play the piano, and that was it.
Mhm. What a magnificent and marvelous story, because, you know, something was modeled for you so early on in your life, and then tied to just the wondrous world of music, which is all about emotions. And, what an incredible way to start your life. And it could very well be that, dating back to this experience, um, that when you could not find your own voice, it wasn't so much, it wasn't debilitating for you as much as it was frustrating that you couldn't solve this problem, and that you were just simply determined to solve this problem in the same way that you were going to go about having those piano lessons. And how marvelous is that, Bruce? I love that story so much.
It's cool to think back and know that I
Yeah.
can I can remember that moment in time. Yeah, it is.
Hmm. I just looked at the clock and I'm like, okay, how did that just happen? How did an hour just breeze right by, which is often the case? But
Yeah.
before we wrap it up, I want to ask you something about as you see yourself going forward in life and what your next move is. You obviously want to help a lot of people,
Oh,
and
yes.
because it's the kind of work that you're doing, and it has become your life's work, and it is your passion. And what is the feeling that you want to leave with people as a result of your passion and how it manifests?
I think the feeling I want to leave is that, you know what? If you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling frustration, if you're feeling overwhelmed, get out there and help someone else. That's what
Mm-hmm.
makes the difference. And I just interviewed a man just little while ago who he said the same thing. He said he noticed in a book he was reading or something, someone said, if you're feeling lost or stuck, save a child's life. And so he
Mm-hmm.
immediately searched for charities,
Mm-hmm.
and he did something about that and donated money to this charity. And a long time ago, I did that, and I decided that Save the Children was a
Mm-hmm.
charity I wanted to support. So part of the proceeds from my podcast and from the work I do goes to Save the Children. And I'm really impressed with that organization and how most of the money that they bring in goes to actually helping children. Very little of it
Mm-hmm.
goes to administration. So I'm very
Mm-hmm.
impressed with that. And I just think get out there and do something for others, help other people, and that
Mm-hmm.
will be a positive thing for you too.
Oh, nothing could be truer. I know that to be a fact that, when you're feeling bad, it doesn't matter how it is that you've arrived at that, but when you're feeling bad, when you take your focus off yourself and you look outward, I mean, it could just be, helping an elderly person walk across the street. When you have helped someone, there are things that happen in your brain that actually produce chemicals that result in you feeling better. And so when you feel shitty or you feel like things aren't going your way or you're stuck, just like you say, Bruce, go out and help somebody, because in doing so, you're helping yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, beautiful. What a wonderful conversation, Bruce. We could talk all day long because I have a
Yes.
million more questions for you. We've just scratched the surface here. So, as we wrap this up, if people are interested in learning more about you or, just talking with you about the business of mindfulness and perhaps even working with you, where can they find you?
Well, they can find me at mindfulnessmode.com. And that's where my podcast lives. And I've got a free gift for listeners. If you wish to go to mindfulnessmode.com/calm, CALM, and it's a PDF outlining some ways that you can bring some of these positive aspects of mindfulness into your life. So yeah, just go to mindfulnessmode.com, check out the podcast, and subscribing to the podcast is always a big help if it's the kind of podcast you relate to. And
Mm-hmm.
you can listen to it on iTunes or on Stitcher or so many other apps. So yeah, thanks Arlene for giving me an
Beautiful.
opportunity to mention about the podcast, because it's part of my passion, that's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And you've got the most amazing radio voice. I could just sit and listen to you all day long, Bruce. I swear to God.
And you're so funny. I
Oh,
just
God.
loved interviewing you, Arlene. That's why I thought about that a lot, because you're just so upfront, straightforward, and kick ass. I just love it.
Oh, Bruce, thank you so much. Well, this has been really delightful. Um, I look forward to continuing conversations with you and just to continuing our relationship. It's been so delightful thus far. And, you just never know where we go in life, but I somehow suspect you and I are going to be tracking one another for quite some time. And I'm looking forward to that. So, Bruce, thank you so very much for being with me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Arlene.
Beautiful. Well, there you have it, everyone. I guess the thing that I would leave you with as we wrap up this episode of What's Your Next Move is to be mindful in what you're doing and what you're thinking and how you're approaching what you're doing. And mindfulness also comes into play when you're trying to decide what your next move is. And as is always the case, as I end each episode, I ask you to think about where you're at in your life and think about what's your next move. I'm Arlene Battisil. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back with another episode. Welcome to What's Your Next Move, the podcast for peak performers who are making things happen but are running into roadblocks that prevent them from getting what they want. Whether you work for someone else, you're an entrepreneur, thinking about starting your own business, or at a point in your life where you just can't make the move from where you are to where you want to go, you're in the right place. This podcast is all about answering one question: what's your next move? And helping you harness your power so your next move is the one that changes your life. I'm your host and resident provocateur, Arlene Battisil, and I want to know, what's your next move?